You're listening to Mike Adams and Chris Savory, the record collectors from the BBC.
On BBC Local Radio in Shropshire, North Staffordshire, South Cheshire and the West Midlands, we present Mike Adams and Chris Savory, the record collectors, from now until 9 tonight.
With you in the Midlands, BBC Radio.
Presenting programmes in local radio.
1 2 3 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3 1 2 3. 1 2 3 1 2 3. Well, tonight on the programme we warmly welcome a gentleman who was a heartthrob throughout the 60s and continues today. That is John Leyton. Welcome to the Record Collectors programme, John.
Hello, Mike. Thank you for asking me on.
Let's talk about your beginning. I remember a programme called Biggles, and you played the part of a 21-year-old ginger in it. Was that your first acting role?
Well, it was. It was my first, I suppose, professional acting role, although I'd already spent a year at the Theatre Royal York, which was a repertory theatre. But, yeah, it was certainly the first thing I ever did in front of a camera.
You then, of course, tried, I think, with Pi and EMI for recording contracts, which were unsuccessful. What were the tracks you recorded?
As Michael Caine might say, not a lot of people know that. You're quite right, yeah. I think, yeah, I went up on my own and to do a test for EMI, and I think it was Norman Newell at EMI, and I walked in all on my own, and the piano player was somebody called Russ Conway. I don't know if you remember Russ Conway. He actually had a lot of hits, I think, as a pianist, and yeah, it was an appalling test, and I quite rightly didn't get through on it. I was so nervous. I think I was about sort of 19 at the time, and it was a very bad recording test. And then I did one for Pi, that's right. I remember singing I Love You for Sentimental Reasons, which was something that Nat King Cole recorded. I thought that was actually quite a good test, but I didn't get that either. So it wasn't until I met up with Joe Meek that I actually was offered a deal.
How did that meeting with Joe Meek, what started that meeting? Did Joe approach you, or did you approach Joe?
I was introduced to Joe via my manager. You see, during the run of Biggles, I seemed to build up quite as a big fan club, and lots of girls would write in and say, you look like a pop singer, or you look like a pop star, or you should be a pop star, why don't you become a pop star, as if you can just become a pop star like that. But anyway, when I got back to London, we thought, well, that's not such a bad idea. It's music I'd always been interested in, and so we looked into it, and my manager, I think, discovered or found somehow Joe Meek, and I was introduced to him and Charles Blackwell.
Now, of course, that you, having failed those auditions, you had 2 records on Top Rank. One was Tell Laura I Love Her, which was a cover of a cover, because Ricky Valance had the hit #1 on Columbia. You were on Top Rank, and of course it was an American original record that went to #1 in the States. And yours sort of got withdrawn from sale, didn't it?
Well, what happened was, yes, I think I'm right in saying, was it Lee Patterson? No, it wasn't Lee Patterson. I can't remember. Over here it was Ricky Valance, but I can't remember who it was in the States. Anyway, I think he had a major hit with it in the States. And you're quite right, yes, I covered it over here for Top Rank, on the Top Rank label. Unfortunately, it was just about to be released, and Top Rank was taken over by EMI, and EMI had their own version by Ricky Valance, so mine was thrown in the bin. And then, in compensation for that, they said, "Oh, we're terribly sorry, but we'll rush out another record," which is probably the most appalling record I've ever made, called The Girl on the Floor Above.
Which is extremely collectible, that one. That's one of the hardest records to get.
Really? It's probably very rare. I probably found most of them and thrown them in the bin, you see.
Harper's West One, that was something that was on network television.
Yes.
Any memories from that?
Well, Harper's West One, of course, is where I sang Johnny Remember Me for the very first time on Harper's West One. It was all rather coincidental, because I'd already recorded Johnny Remember Me, and my acting side reared its head again, because I was offered a role in Harper's West One, which was a television series at the time, about a London store called Harper's in the postal district of West One, and I was offered the role to play a pop star called Johnny Sincere, who goes along to the record to the store and opens up the record department. And it was suggested that Johnny Sincere should sing his latest record. And of course I'd already recorded Johnny Remember Me, so it was absolutely a sort of perfect situation.
There was a change in the lyrics of Johnny Remember Me because The Girl I Loved and Died a Year Ago was
Yes.
changed because of the BBC, wasn't it?
That's right, yes. Well, they weren't too happy about Tell Laura I Love Her, although it went to number one. I think it was described as a death disc, and there had been a death disc before that of some sort, and certainly the lyrics of Johnny Remember Me were the girl I loved who died a year ago, and we went back in the studio and changed it to the girl I loved and lost a year ago.
Good
Now-
evening and welcome to Burdenswell Leisure Centre.
And now, of course, TV's Harper's West One, the Death Songs, but Jeff Goddard, when you were recording Tell Laura I Love Her, not Tell Laura I Love Her, start again. The recording of Johnny Remember Me, which we've just heard, that, of course, was Jeff Goddard's composition. Right. Jeff Goddard, did he used to sing along when he used to record, or was it just a myth?
He used to make a funny noise. You could hardly call it singing, but he used to sort of buzz like a bee. He always did. I mean, whenever you played the piano, he made this sort of buzzing noise with his mouth. And
Good evening and welcome to the Burdenswell Leisure Centre.
Oh. Now, the Johnny Remember Me sessions, Jeff Goddard used to make a peculiar noise during the recordings, didn't he? Tell us about the Johnny Remember Me sessions with Joe Meek.
Well, Joe Meek's studio was pretty strange, of course, because it was in the Holloway Road in North London, and it was actually over a leather shop. It was his home. It was a maisonette, and the string section was sort of halfway up the stairs. The vocal backing were in the bathroom. I was in the sitting room, and Joe was in the kitchen, and it was like that. But Jeff Goddard used to play piano on the records, and particularly on Johnny Remember Me, he was quite prominent, and he always used to. He never used to sing, but he used to make this funny noise with his mouth, which sort of sounded like a bee. He buzzed. It was like a buzzing noise, which went all the way through the records. And I think Joe quite liked the sound anyway, because it's actually in the records.
Now, of course, there's a lot of accolades with your recordings now, and of course, a lot of people consider Joe Meek's recordings to be historic in these days anyway. But in those days, electronic recordings and messing with your voice, the actual, you might call the media itself, gave you a very hard time. In fact, you seem to be got at by just about everybody, except people like Jack Good. What were your feelings at the time?
Well, Joe was very advanced technically, and certainly you're quite right. There were a lot of complaints that there was a lot of distortion on the records. I think one piece in one of the papers was Leyton sounds as if he's singing at the bottom of an empty well. I think was one of the quotes. But of course now it's I think perhaps, if I may say so, that's one of the reasons that perhaps Johnny Remember Me in particular seems to stand the test of time, because now of course recordings have got technically advanced. What Joe would be doing now I have no idea, but he was certainly ahead of his time.
Did you find it difficult working with Joe? Was he a temperamental person? So much has been written about him by people that perhaps didn't even know him. You were there and had a lot of success with Joe. How would you sum him up?
Well, I understand that he was temperamental. I understand that he did go off the handle, fly off the handle at the least provocation. But I knew him well, and I never ever experienced that once. When I went to Joe's house or maisonette, his studio, whatever you want to call it, he was so nice and so patient, and we always had a drink, cup of tea or whatever first, and if things went wrong, he would laugh. And I'm amazed when I hear these stories about his temper. It's something that I never experienced. I can only speak highly of him as somebody that cooperated enormously.
Now, during this time, of course, you were still, your profession then, of course, was an actor, and sort of singing was like a bolt-on goodie, one might say. You were well received by Jack Good in Disc magazine. He used to write in the Disc Pop magazine very favourably about your recordings. And, of course, then came the onslaught of the Beatles. Right. That affected a lot of solo stars. What were your memories about 62, 63? How did it affect you?
Well, it didn't really. It affected me in 1964. That was the last tour I went out on in 1964, and on that tour, I had a support band or act called the Rolling Stones, who did rather well after that. But it was pretty obvious to me, that was a 6-week tour, and it was pretty obvious to me that the face of pop music was changing pretty drastically. And I couldn't turn myself into 4 John Leytons, so, but as it happened, fate waved its hand, because it was right after that tour that I went back into films. I did a film called Guns at Batazi with Richard Attenborough, and then I was signed up by Fox, and before I knew where I was off to Italy to do Von Ryan's Express with Frank Sinatra. So I went really straight back into acting again, and music and pop singing or whatever, and I parted really very amicably.
With a lot of comparisons to Frank Sinatra with singers of your period. You worked with Frank Sinatra. What was he like?
Frank Sinatra is one of the most professional people I've ever worked with. I mean, he was a legend then, and he'll always be a legend. But I mean, he was a legend then, and he was very professional and very helpful. When you do close-ups in films, the camera's on you in a close-up. You need somebody standing behind the camera to give you your lines. And often big stars, don't bother to do that. But Frank Sinatra always did bother to do that. He was always on time. He always knew his lines, and he was very helpful, and he was very nice to me. I think he sort of almost treated me like a son in a way, because he just sort of generally looked after me.
Now, you made a musical comeback in 1974. You went back to the recording world in '74. You sort of got out of you might say, the cut and thrust of the '60s and made a fortune, or would appear to have made a fortune out of movies. You're smiling. And in '74 you decided to make a comeback. What sort of preempted that?
Well, I was living in Los Angeles, and I met up with the man who ran a company called York Records, and Kenny Young was also involved with him, and I was asked to come back to England to put an album together with some Kenny Young songs. And it just seemed like a good idea at the time, I suppose, and I came back and did this album for York Records, which is an indifferent album. It's certainly totally different from anything I did before. And having done that, I thought, no, I don't think I'm really ready to do all this again, and that was it.
Any very sort of vivid memories from that whole period that you can still hold and you think that was something I'll never forget, or anything that sticks in your mind as humorous or otherwise from that era?
Well, there are so many things. Certainly The Great Escape is something that is held very special in my memory, because sadly Steve McQueen has gone, and Gordon Jackson has gone, and it was such a happy film, and it was my very first film, and everybody got on so incredibly well. And I think it probably showed in front of the camera that everybody got on so well, because it was such a happy film to make. So that's something that I remember very well. I have to say that if I may just talk about The Great Escape for a minute, one of the things that one often remembers about The Great Escape is Steve McQueen doing the jump on the motorbike, which in fact he didn't do because he wasn't allowed to do it, because there was more filming to do and he might have might hurt himself. So. However, he could have done it very easily, because we used to go back to the studio at night after everybody had closed down, everybody had gone home, and we used to take the bikes out, and we've both done that jump many times. So it was rather ironic that he wasn't allowed to do it on screen.
Now, just put us up to date with where you are now. This is a fabulous tour that you're on currently, and I'll be giving the tour date information out shortly, folks. And we know you're playing to packed houses, but this has been a long break. What's John Leyton been doing in the interim?
Well, I can't really believe I'm back here doing this, but first of all, I'm doing it because I think there is a genuine interest in the era of music with which I was involved. But I lived in Hollywood for many years, and then I came back to England, and then I got involved in production, and then I started veering into various business deals, and one day I found myself totally out of show business, which was actually quite worrying, because I didn't really know. I thought to myself, I only know about show business, but I was out of show business, involved in property and restaurants and all sorts of strange things. And it's only recently with with this nostalgic interest, and now I'm back, and I've got a new recording deal, and I've got a new single out, and it seems to all be happening again.
Well, we wish you actually continued success, or renewed success. Are you going to tell us what the new single is?
Yeah, the new single is a song that is written by Sammy King. Sammy King wrote, amongst others, Penny Arcade for Roy Orbison. And Sammy, I knew Sammy years ago, and I spent a couple of days with him, and we came up with a real sort of upbeat country rock number called Think We're Talking Love.
And that's going to be released this side of Christmas?
It's just been released.
And the label it's on, John?
Mooncrest.
On Mooncrest, and that record will be out. Hopefully I'll get a copy of that to play you for you, dear listener. Finally, John, thank you for all the music. Choose any record you like other than Johnny Remembered Me. Any favourite of your recordings, because I've got most of them, and I'll put it on right now.
Any favourite of mine?
Yes, any favourite of yours, of your own recordings.
Oh, right. Does that include album tracks?
It includes album tracks, yes. Okay. I think I've got most of them, yes.
I quite like a song called Fabulous I recorded, an old Charlie Gracie number.
And here is Fabulous from the fabulous John Leyton. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
That's it.